Hello everybody, welcome back to the Brothers Grimdark. A few of you folks have been asking how I go about painting, that's a weird one, painting my Tyranids. So today we're going to spend a little bit of time just doing a quick painting tutorial. I'm going to show you the basic techniques I use, some of the special paints that are involved, and just walk you through it from start to finish. It's pretty simple, so I think it'll be pretty accessible for everybody, but if you have any questions, of course, leave those in the comments. I'll be sure to answer those. But with that, let's get straight to the painting desk. Welcome back, everybody. So we are now in our lovely painting studio area. It's weirdly brightly lit here compared to everything else we do. I guess that's one of the issues of calling yourself Brothers Grimdark, but there we are. So today we're going to be looking at a Zoanthrope, as I kind of mentioned earlier, and in true Art Attack style. Here's one I made earlier, just so you can kind of get an idea of what we're going to be doing. We're mostly going to be focusing on the things like the armored carapace, the claws, talons, and the main body. He also has this kind of nice lavy base. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, maybe there. I'm not going to cover how I do bases and things today. If you'd like to know more about that, leave a comment and we can cover that in a future video maybe. But yeah, today I just kind of wanted to cover the basics of how I paint my Tyranids, which is mostly that armor, the flesh, and their kind of claws, teeth things. So let's start with that. So that was a finished one. This is what we start with. So this is my fully built Zoanthrope that we're going to be painting today. And you can probably tell he's been primed already. And for that, I am using Citadel's Lead Belcher. Really good, just standard silver color to kind of get things started with. So he gets a good coat of that, and that's basically it to get started. No fancy zenithal or anything like that, just straight coat of Lead Belcher, and then we're on our way. So after the Lead Belcher, the first thing we're going to be doing is giving him a good old coat of Black Templar. I really like this kind of trend right now of using contrast paints over top of metallics. I think it's just kind of a cool look, quite different, especially for the look I'm going for my nids. I think it looks quite good. So that's kind of the basis of the whole model. So we're going to start with that, and I'm basically going to slosh this over absolutely everything. So it goes over the armor, it goes over the flesh. I sometimes leave the claws and things because those are going to be a brighter silver later, so you can do that, but I wouldn't worry too much. Right now, this is all about speed and efficiency, so don't worry too much about being neat here, just get the paint over everything. Also with contrast paints, I'm sure you already know this, but like they do require a really good shake to get them all mixed up properly. I gave this one a good shake earlier, but obviously make sure you do that before you get started. So off we go. And again, for this, it's all about speed, so I'm using a pretty nice big brush, and I'm just gonna, paint the whole thing with Black Templar, and yep, we'll go from there. Straight out the pot. I don't mind getting it on quite thickly and then just moving it around. So you don't want it to build up in any places, but yeah, just getting it on all over. And you can sort of look for areas like this section of the tail is a nice kind of area to start with and block everything in there. And I do the same thing over the armor plates. They're actually going to get a second coat of this later, so good to get that first one on now. But just keep that paint moving as you're kind of going so it doesn't pool up in weird places. Love the heads on the Zoanthropes. Probably one of my favorite nid heads. His enormous, big, bulging brain, and then this weird chin thing sticking out the bottom. A huge crest on the top. Definitely reminds me a lot of the Queen from Aliens, that sort of look. Yeah, awesome models. Really, really fun. So happy to be adding a few more to my collection. And just make sure it gets all into all those weird nooks and crannies and gaps between armor plates and things. All right, that's basically it. That's the first major step done. So you can see he's obviously still wet. We'll let him dry now. One thing you might notice with contrast paints especially is they're designed to kind of flow off of smooth surfaces. So you might find little patches where they just don't cover it at all. Try not to touch them up at this stage. You might just end up tearing the paint and things like that. So usually once they're dry, I'll kind of do a second pass over it. Go look for any of those kind of spots where it looks like it didn't get any good coverage, and just give it another kind of thin little coat over top, just so it's even everywhere. But that's it. That's the kind of the only weird thing with working with contrast paints. Just kind of keep an eye out for that. But yeah, try not to correct it while the paint's still wet because you might just make a bit of a mess. Yeah, that's it. We'll come back when he's dry. When you're doing these in batches, by the time you finish 4 or 5 of them, the first one will be dry, so it's much quicker. But yeah, we'll be back once he's dry and move on to the next step. Okay, we're back after waiting for the Black Templar to dry. So you can see now he's kind of got this nice silvery gray kind of look to him. A little bit of a metallic sheen still, but mostly it's kind of dark grayish kind of color. So that's going to be our base for working off the flesh kind of areas next. So we're going to ignore the kind of crest armor plate type pieces for this next step. We're just going to focus on pieces like the rib cage, his tail, his face, the brain kind of bits, all the sort of flesh areas, and ignore the armor plates. We'll come back to them later. So what we're going to be doing is a bit of dry brushing, keep things really simple and fast again. So I'm going to start off with lead belcher, kind of going back to that initial base. That's just going to bring out some of those more silvery bits on those kind of raised edges. And then we'll do a second highlight of Runefang steel after that. And that was just going to be used to kind of exaggerate a few of those more prominent areas like the face, the brain, maybe some of those raised ribs, but we'll get to that when we get there. We'll start off with the lead belcher, and we're going to do a light dry brush over most of those flesh areas. Ignore most of the armor plates and things. We'll come back to those later. Again, I'm going to kind of work in the same way as before, just kind of starting off with the tail, working my way up, just kind of picking out a few of those areas. It turns out all these weird like vents and ridges and things, so we're just trying to make those a little bit more prominent. Okay. So after the lead belcher dry brushing, you can kind of see it's got a little bit more of that silver back again, but still mostly this kind of like dark gray kind of look, but a bit brighter now. So next we're just going to go and add a little bit more highlighting to that. So we're going to go to Runefang steel and repeat the kind of process again, but I'm going to avoid most of the main kind of flesh areas and just focus on like the head, the ribs, and the edge of the tail, like anything that's particularly prominent, so that those get a little bit more extra bright highlights. So at this point, we've now got those extra little highlights on there. They just make a little bit of a subtle difference, kind of bringing out some of those details around the face and those kind of raised areas. That's going to be it for the fleshy areas for now. They are going to get one more highlight later, but I'm going to do that when I do a whole bunch of other highlights over the rest of the whole model. So just to kind of speed things up, it makes it more sense to kind of do those all at the same time. So that's mostly it for the flesh areas right now. The next thing we're going to tackle is the carapace, and we'll come back for that in a second. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is the sort of metal, the armor plates, like his crest, the plates around his back, anything like that. So right now those just have those single kind of coat of Black Templar over them, so it's sort of that gray color. We're going to be going over those with a kind of special paint later on, and we want to make sure that we have a really solid black to get that effect working as best as possible. So what I'm going to do is basically just give it a second coat of Black Templar. The reason I do that instead of something like just a solid black color is it still leaves a slightly different finish on the raised areas, and I am going to go and highlight those later. So it's okay if the effect of the next paint doesn't work perfectly on the ridges, because that's going to get covered up anyway. And I find Black Templar is just a really nice, works right out of the pot, very simple to kind of flow over everything, and it just kind of ties everything together since I'm just using the same paints anyway. Okay, so now we've got that second coat of Black Templar on there. It's obviously still wet right now, but you can start to see, hopefully, the difference between the main flesh areas we've done and just the black on the carapace. We're going to wait for that to dry now, and then once that's done, I'll show you how we do the color shift technique, which is kind of one of the signature things I think that gives these looks. So we'll be back for that shortly. All right, so we've now got that second coat of Black Templar dried. So it's mostly a fairly solid black. You can kind of see over the armor plates now. So not perfectly black, but this is the effect that I find works quite well for what I'm going for at least. So the next thing we're going to be doing is, this is kind of the secret sauce of this particular recipe, is I'm using a color shift paint over top of that. This one is the Storm Surge Green, I think? Yes, Storm Surge Green from Green Stuff World. I actually use a different color for different sort of sizes of units. So I use some for like my little gaunts, I use a different one for my big monsters. This is the color is the one I use for sort of my mid-size things, so the Zoanthropes and the Warriors mostly. And one thing to know about these color shift paints is they're really dependent, the effect you get is very dependent on what your base coat looks like. So I've experimented around a little bit with this you can try like really glossy blacks, really solid matte blacks. You can try doing your highlights beforehand. So one thing I tried earlier on was like dry brushing all the silver bits first and then putting this over. They all give a different kind of look. So if you're going to play around with color shift paints, I encourage you to experiment a little bit with what that kind of base coat looks like to get the effect that you like. For me, I find that 2 coats of Black Templar is a good starting point, and then I do the highlights afterwards, but there are other ways of doing this. So anyway, with all that said, I'm basically just going to go over all the armor plates again with the Storm Surge Green. Usually takes 2 coats. The paints are a little bit different than working with your sort of standard Citadel paints or Vallejo or whatever. So you do want to make sure that you're putting 2 thin coats down with these. They just have a kind of different texture, so just be a little bit careful with that. You can see that on the brush, it almost looks like silvery, but as soon as it goes over the model, then the green comes out. It really is a very cool effect. And in different kind of lights, you get this different sort of shimmer effect. And all these different color shift paints, they all have different effects. Some of them give you those different kind of colors. Some of them are a bit more opalescent. So I encourage you to try some different things to see what kind of ones work for you. That I actually use different colors on different models for different sort of effects. But this is the Storm Surge Green. And you can see it's a very quite metallic green color that comes out from this. Okay, so now I've got that first coat on. You can see that it really catches the light, even just without that first coat. You get a very iridescent poppy green color out of this. So I'm going to go over this again with a second coat. One thing that's again quite different about these paints compared to your standard acrylics is going over a second coat, I don't actually find changes the saturation of the color or the effect all that much. But it is useful for just making sure that there's no streaks or kind of weird little bits when you're kind of going over with those kind of thin coats. So I'm going to go back, do another coat over there just to get as smooth a finish as possible. But it doesn't actually change all that much the sort of intensity of it. At least that's what I've found so far. What does make a difference is what that base coat is. So you'll find that if you don't get a solid black base coat, adding multiple coats of this color shift on top of that really won't make a difference. It really has to be that effect you get. The effect you're going to get is going to be very much based on the strength of the coat you have underneath. So something to consider when you're just experimenting with these. But I'll be right back once I've got that second coat on. So now that we've finished working on the carapace for now, we're going to move on to the claws and the teeth. For these, I wanted to create an effect that was a little bit unworldly and also separate it from the rest of the body. So it is a silver, but I'm using aqua turquoise. It's another Green Stuff World paint. Mostly again to kind of, just a sort of bluey silver, but just something a little bit different than if I'd just gone with a straight silver to make it feel a little bit more alien. I have fond memories of the Games Workshop paint range from way back in the day where they did metallic paint such as amethyst purple. I used that on everything back in the day. So wouldn't mind if GW brought back a few more of those metal colored paints again, but for now this is what I'm using. You could also just mix in a little bit of blue with a standard silver if that's a bit easier. But yeah, this is the base coat I use for claws, teeth, talons, all that sort of stuff. The one thing I will say about this paint in particular is I don't find it has particularly great coverage. So again, trying not to use too thick, clumpy paint, but it does take probably 2 coats to get a nice solid base. Okay, so that's what he looks like when he's got those 2 coats of the metal on his teeth and talons. Okay, so now we have those 2 coats on the claws and talons and things. So we've got this nice solid metallic blue base. So what we're going to do is add a little bit of a gradient effect to this now. So the first thing we're going to do is add some shades. I find the easiest way to do this is with shade paints. So we're going to be using Drakenhof Nightshade, nice blue color, got some nice richness to it. So I'm going to basically wash that into the recesses and the parts of the talons that are closest to his body. And then later on, we're going to do a highlight where we do more of the brighter silver towards the end. So you get this going from like blue to bright silver kind of effect. On small models like this, basically you can get away with doing one shade and then a bright highlight. On larger models like Trigons, Hive Tyrands, that sort of thing, you might need to do a little bit of blending on the middle part, but we're not going to worry about that for this particular model. Okay, so now we're basically just going to go over that Drakenhof Nightshade a second time, but this time just focusing on those areas in like the top third, top quarter or so. So we're building up more of the dark blue here and leaving that middle section as it was on the first pass. Okay, so hopefully now you can start to see a little bit more of that strong gradient effect starting to come in with that second coat of the Drakenhof. Particularly here, like you can see it's much darker blue near the top and then going down to that silver at the bottom. And the next stage is going to be even bringing out more of that silver to get even a stronger gradient all the way across. All right, so now we have that second coat of Drakenhof Nightshade on there. So the talons have got this nice extra bluey kind of look to them now. And now, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't do that last highlight on the body. We also didn't do that last highlight on the carapace, and that's because we're going to do basically everything all at once now. So the name of the game here is speed efficiency, trying to get as much done with as few steps as possible. So I'm going to be using Stormhost Silver. And again, we're going to be doing a little bit of dry brushing. And we're going to do that on basically everything, or at least every area that we've touched on before. So the face as a whole is going to get one last little highlight as a dry brush. The carapace on the edges around, the plates, we're going to try and give a little bit of a silver to that. And same thing with the talons and teeth. Those are also going to get that little edge highlight of the silver to kind of brighten that up. But that's one of the benefits of doing these parts and stages is we can now do this one last highlight all together. You're just going to be focusing on particular areas to kind of bring those little key bits out. But that means we're not having to do this stage 3 times as we're kind of going through. We can do this once at the end. And once we have that stage done, we're going to be mostly done with this model, other than the base and things like that, but we'll cover that another time. So let's get cracking on. And because this is our final highlight, you want to be very gentle with your dry brushing. So get almost all the paint off that brush and just be, test it out, make sure there's no paint on there you don't want to be on there. It's going to come out nice and smoothly. And you're just going to very gently start picking out those final edges and the tips of the talons in those areas that you really want to have the brightest effect. Now onto the carapace. So on all these horns and the pipes and things, vents I suppose is more appropriate. Just again, it's more of like an edge highlight, just really trying to catch those edges with our dry brush. Being very gentle. So we're just picking out those edges. And brushing up so that we're just catching the edges of the plates. I'm just going to add a little bit of extra highlighting on the kind of brain area here just to give it more of that, exaggerate that 3D effect. I also do tend to do a bit of a glow effect on their brains. I'm not going to cover that today. If you'd like to know how I do that, let me know. But this will just help give me a bit of a base for that as well. And same thing on the crest as with the other armor plates, just focusing on those edges, brushing along so we're just picking up the ridges, not anything else. Okay, so this is what he looks like. That last step, it's fairly subtle, but it really does help catch those edges, just brighten them up a little bit, make everything stand out. Hopefully the face pops out a little bit more. You get those extra highlights on like the chin and the cheeks, as well as the teeth. So yeah, just bringing out a few of those details and giving that nice gradient on the talons. So we're now actually onto the very last step. It's gone by pretty quickly. So it took a little bit of experimentation to find the right kind of color for this. What I'm going to do now is do one last wash over the armor plates and gaps in their Tyranids kind of have these things where on their joints around like their wrists, elbows, places like that, they've kind of got this sort of more ribbing sort of effect. So I want to just distinguish that a little bit from the rest of the body, as well as get a little bit of extra shade into the armor plates. So what I've found that works best is Null Oil Gloss. The reason for this is instead of using like the regular Null Oil, if you use that over that shimmer effect, it really kind of deadens and kills the effect. So you really want to stick with more of a gloss varnish. I have heard Games Workshop is going to be discontinuing this color though, so if you have any suggestions for an alternative to Null Oil Gloss that I can be using in the future, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll be doing a little bit of experimenting myself to kind of figure out the right piece here. So this is the last piece, so I'm just going to kind of go over all of the armor plates, focusing on the recesses just to give them a little bit extra shade there. And then any of those joint areas and also the mouth. So that got a bit of a glossy kind of look to it. It just looks a bit more gross and weird and evil, and that's what we're going for. So yeah, we'll crack on with that now. And now I'm going to go over the armor plates. Now with these, you do want to give a little coat over everything, but you want to really focus that the paint is going to end up in the joints and cracks. So pulling the paint into those recesses. So it's mostly darkening there. We've got this lovely green shimmer effect. We don't want to just completely cover that up with a dark color now. So, and as with the Black Templar that I used earlier, just keep an eye out that as you're doing this, that the paint isn't pooling up in any areas, that you're keeping it moving and moving towards those recesses. I do the same thing on the tops of the vents. And also these weird gill things on the side of the vents as well. Just draw up a little bit of the shade in there too. Oh, don't forget to do the crest. Not done. Kind of a big thing to forget. Paint his whole head. How could I forget your big zappy head? Now, the only thing I'll mention about the Null Oil Gloss is that last step. If you do go and put a like satin varnish, Minotaurian varnish or whatever on your models afterwards, it might kill that kind of gloss effect. It also can deaden the shimmer and color shift effect on the Carapace. But not to worry, if you encounter that, you want to protect your models as you should if you're going to be playing with them a lot. What you can do is simply just go over all of those areas again with a gloss varnish after the satin finish, and that brings the color right back again in that effect. That's what I do with my models, and it gives them exactly like they look right now, but still protect with the benefits of protecting them with a varnish. So that's it. Hope that was really useful. Very simple painting technique scheme, no advanced techniques or anything. Mostly just dry brushing, highlights, and some washes. But I hope you find it's an effective color scheme, looks good on the table, and yeah, we can bash through them pretty quickly. So let me know what you think. If you've got any other alternatives for what to do instead of Null Oil Gloss, so I can replace that over time, let me know. I've got a little bit of a batch of them right now, so I won't run out anytime soon. But let me know what you think about that. If you've got any other suggestions for things I can do even more efficiently with them, or would make them more effective, that'd be great too. But yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.